5 stories of assassination attempts. Story 1. This happened when I was in 5th grade. I had a few friends from school and we were pretty close. I was the shy type, I still am, but I got along pretty well socially anyway. One day, my mom told me that she would arrange for me to spend time with the son of one of her friends from work. He went to a different school in my city, so I didn't understand why he didn't hang up with his own friends. It didn't seem like I had much choice, so I didn't argue with her. The boy's name was Kevin. He was a year older than me, and he was quite naughty at times. Sometimes he took things too far. Once, when I was at his house, we played a weird game where he would put random things on the street and then watch around waiting for a car to crush them. For example, he once put a golf ball in the middle of the fairway. A car hit her with the edge of the tire and the ball shot out and broke the neighbor's wooden fence. To be honest, it was pretty cool. But still, I was a little scared of Kevin. Being around him was strange. All the time I felt like he was about to hit me, even when we were getting along. It was a strange feeling. Again, we were in his basement. His mother had gone to the store, leaving us alone for what was supposed to be half an hour. They had a nice living room set up down there, some old couches and a small TV. It was the 90s, so it wasn't bad for that time. We were playing video games, I think it was the Sega Genesis. Suddenly, Kevin paused the game and said he had something cool to show me. He ran upstairs, leaving me alone in the basement. A few minutes passed and I heard him stirring upstairs. Then, without any warning, Kevin yelled, "Catch him!" I looked up just in time to see what appeared to be a fireball flying down the stairs. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was on fire. There was no time to do anything. The torch lit the synthetic carpet and the flame quickly spread, faster than I could have imagined. I stood there in shock as the fire grew, quickly consuming the small room. I screamed for Kevin, but there was no response. Smoke filled the room, making it difficult for me to breathe or see. I managed to move around the fire and up the stairs, but when I tried to open the door, it didn't move. There was no lock on that door, although Kevin kept it locked. I knocked a couple of times, but finally gave up and went back down the stairs. The fire almost reached me when I returned. My shirt was over my face, trying to keep the smoke out. Then I remembered a small window on the other side of the room. I had seen Kevin use it before to get in and out. He proudly told me that sometimes he would sneak out at night and that window was how he did it. I ran to the window, and when I arrived, the smoke wasn't as dense. The fire wasn't spreading to that part of the basement because there was no carpet there. It was a wooden floor on that side. I went to the window and struggled to open it. I was stuck, and for a scary moment I thought I was trapped. With a few more attempts, I managed to force it open and went up to the backyard. From outside, I looked towards the house. Smoke was coming out of the basement window, and I could see the flames when I looked inside. Neighbors had noticed the smoke and called the fire department. They were there shortly after I left. I stood there coughing and watching as the firefighters rushed toward the house. When Kevin's parents arrived, they were frantic. I heard Kevin's voice from behind them. He twisted the story to make it sound like an accident, saying he had been trying to do something he saw online and didn't realize the danger. Couldn't believe it. He lied so easily, and the worst thing was that everyone believed him. He hugged his mom, and as he did so, we made eye contact. He gave me a sly smile that made me hate him even more. That child was pure evil, but he couldn't prove it. My parents were furious and forbade me from seeing Kevin again, a decision I completely agreed with. I told them the truth, and they believed me. Kevin tried to kill me that day, and my parents were the only ones who believed me, not Kevin's parents or the police. He got away with it for the most part. My mom told me later that Kevin had some social issues, that he couldn't make friends at his school. He thought that if he spent time with him, maybe his social skills would improve. He apologized a lot back then and still apologizes if the incident ever comes up. The feeling of guilt he felt must have been tremendous. It's been a long time since this happened, and I heard that Kevin's family moved out a few years later. I don't know what happened to him, but I'd be surprised if his future was very bright. Someone who tries something like that in 5th grade is on the wrong track. I hope he has changed his ways, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's in jail. Story 2. Now I live in a different state than my family. Normally I would fly to visit them, but this time I decided to drive because I left some things at my parents' house when I moved in and wanted to pick them up. It was a trip of about 10 hours, so that meant a full day if I could hit the road early in the morning. However, on the day I was leaving, I fell asleep and then spent some time with my younger brother in the early afternoon. When I finally hit the road, it was about 3 p.m. At first, I convinced myself that I could still do it in a single day, but when the sun started to set, I knew that wasn't possible. It was late, and every hotel that passed by was either full or closed. I was tired and with nowhere to stay. I pulled off the freeway and parked on a quiet stretch of road. Technically, it was illegal to sleep there. I even saw a sign warning against it a few miles back. Anyway, I did it because I had no other options. The plan was to sleep a few hours in my car and then continue at dawn. I remember feeling a little restless about sleeping in my car, but I was too exhausted to keep going. I tilted my seat, wrapped myself in my jacket, and closed my eyes. The road was silent except for the occasional passing car or truck. I was on a back road about 5 or 6 meters from the main highway, so I could still see the lights in my rearview mirror, though just barely. There was a lot of forest around, and the road I was on was right next to a wooded area on one side. The other side was a field. I stayed awake for at least an hour. Although I was tired, my car was uncomfortable, so it was difficult. Suddenly, I saw the glare of the headlights flooding my rearview mirror. Although his eyes were closed, he was bright enough that he couldn't ignore it. I opened my eyes and immediately squinted them against the glare. At first I thought they were the police. Maybe they were coming to tell me that I couldn't park there. I moved my seat up and started to gather my strength to drive myself. But then I saw them. 2 men were approaching my car, and they didn't look like policemen. They were wearing normal clothes, and their vehicle was a pickup truck, not a police car. Before I knew it, they were standing at my door. One of them pulled the handle, but it was locked. At that moment, one of the men pulled out a gun and yelled at me to open it. I raised both hands to surrender and pressed the unlock button on my car. One of them opened the door and pulled me out. Standing there on the side of the road, I felt totally vulnerable. The wallet and the phone, one of them growled. I handed them to him without hesitation. Then one of them reached into my car. The door was still open, and took my keys. I was expecting them to leave and steal my car after that, but they didn't. Instead, they dragged me into the woods by the highway. The undergrowth was thick and caught my clothes, branches crunching under our feet as we moved deeper into the darkness. One of them had a flashlight, or maybe it was just a phone, but that was all there was for the light. The thought that they might kill me was a burden on my stomach. Why else would they have taken me there? After about 15 minutes, one of them pushed me to the ground. My face hit the ground and a bunch of cold leaves stuck to my cheek. I looked up, but all I could see were 2 silhouettes with the flashlight over my eyes. I could hear them arguing about me. One of them wanted to shoot me, but the other was trying to dissuade him. It seemed like the plan was to kill me, but one of them was having doubts. At one point, the light turned away from me. I thought that meant they couldn't see me, so I seized the moment. I began to crawl down a slope. I moved as quietly as possible, but kept moving forward. There was a big tree, and I hid behind it, holding my breath, listening for any sign that they were following me. But they didn't come. I waited, every second stretching on endlessly. After about a minute, I could hear screams, but I don't think they would ever come for me. For some reason, they let me go. I waited for what seemed like a really long time, but I had no way of knowing how much time had actually passed. Eventually, I stumbled through the woods, disoriented and frightened. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Eventually, I made it to the freeway and walked down the road to where my car was. The whole time I was terrified that the men would come back and find me. When I got to the road, I looked down. I could see the reflection of my taillights, so I knew my car was still there, but the truck was gone. However, I didn't dare to get close. I was too scared. Besides, I didn't have the keys anyway. I stayed on the main highway and eventually stopped a car for help. They called the police for me, and then the police found me there. As for the tests, there wasn't much. Since I could never see the men well, I couldn't provide a good description. Because of that, they were never caught. I also didn't get my wallet or phone back. When I checked my credit cards, there were no strange charges, so the men were smart enough not to use them. As for the losses, there were not many. I had no cash. My cards were basically useless. They may have gotten a few $100s for my phone, but that would be about it. I had to take my car to a nearby gas station and then took the bus home and got my spare key. It was a bummer to get my car back, but not as bad as if it had actually been stolen. Since then, I've traveled that same route several times and always shudder at the thought of that night. Could all have ended for me in those woods, and I may never have been found. Every time I pass by that place, I'm thankful that it's not my last break. Story 3. I joined a few dating apps last year when the pandemic was winding down, but it didn't go well. I was swiping on Tinder without waiting long when I matched with Melissa. She looked nice enough on her profile, some pictures of her smiling, some with friends and some on what looked like hiking trails, pretty typical but without any red flags other than she was 5 years older than me. It wasn't a deal breaker, but it wasn't my usual preference. His bio was simple and he had some interests that matched mine, so I swiped right. We matched and chatted a bit, then decided to meet. Nothing special, just casual dinner at a local place I knew well. When I got there, I remember feeling the usual nerves that come with a first date. I was waiting near the main entrance of the restaurant, and as soon as I saw it, I knew something wasn't right. Melissa looked different from her photos, enough to make her hesitate for a moment. She looked older and her face did not match the one in her profile picture. It was so dramatic that I wasn't sure if it was the same person. I thought he was probably older than he said. I was 24 and she was supposed to be 29, but there was no way she was less than 40. I know I should have left at that point, but I had nothing else to do. I thought it might be fun to do some more research and find out what was going on with this woman, so I decided to stick with the quote. We talked over dinner and the conversation was fine. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't terrible either. She talked a lot about her job and her cat. I tried to ask a few things that might reveal her age, such as when and where she went to school, but every time I did, she would see right through me and change the subject. I knew I was being cheated, but I went on with it anyway. As the night wore on, I felt the energy between us wane. It was clear that we didn't have much in common. When the bill arrived, he was ready to call it a day, but she suggested we go to her house for a drink. I politely declined and made up some excuse. We walked back to the parking lot without speaking, and I was about 2 or 3 meters ahead of her as I made my way to my car. I looked back at Melissa and offered an awkward greeting. He barely reacted and walked quickly to his car. I laughed to myself at how strange the night was while driving home. It was only a 15-minute drive until I got home. She was renting a decent-sized townhouse with a roommate, but he was out at the time. I showered quickly and then was ready to sleep when my doorbell rang. I looked at the time. It was late and I wasn't expecting anyone, so this was strange. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. It was Melissa standing on my doorstep. I left the door locked but spoke to him anyway. I asked him what he was doing there. He said he just wanted to talk and felt like we had a connection. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him it was late and he needed to leave. She didn't take it well. Her voice rose and she began to accuse me of cheating on her, of being like everyone else. That was something projected if I had ever heard it. I tried to stay calm by repeating that it was time for him to leave. When she didn't leave, I gave up and waited for her to take the hint. I went back to my living room and turned on the TV. I decided to watch some shows because I didn't want to go to bed with her there. Then, 2 loud bangs echoed throughout my house. I also heard a glass break. I thought the 2 blows were gunshots, so I dropped to the floor in front of the couch. Melissa had fired 2 shots at my house, that's what I thought, and I couldn't believe it. This is what you see in the movies. In a panic, I crawled to the back door. I needed to get out of the house, away from this crazy woman. I walked out the back door and hid behind my neighbor's shed. Once I felt confident enough, I dialed the 911. I whispered on the phone and told them my address, which was an emergency. I didn't say much more than that, other than that there was a crazed, armed person who had already fired a gun. They said police were on their way and it would only take a few minutes. What happened in those minutes, I don't know. I didn't dare to look out the window and heard nothing else. I crouched there trying to stay calm, listening for any signal from Melissa, but there was none. Eventually, I heard the cops enter my house, calling her to drop the gun. There was some screaming and then silence. Melissa had been arrested. She was found in my living room with the gun lying on the floor next to her. I guess he was smart enough to leave it before the cops arrived. I still wonder what was going on with that woman. Was she planning to kill me from the beginning? Or was it rejection that upset her? I may never know, but I still wonder what would have happened if I had gone to her house as she offered. It might not be here. Story 4. I went to a concert with a friend of mine in the city center. The band we were going to see wasn't very well known, but their music was something we both enjoyed. Since I didn't have a car and public transport didn't run until so late, I decided to go by bike. I lived in a suburb that was quite far away, but my friend lived closer, so we decided to meet at the bar where the concert was. There was a bike path that you could take for most of the way. He always preferred that over the road as it was going by a river, a route he had taken many times before. The sun was setting as I rode, and it was really nice. I should mention that my city has a serious crime problem, especially in the center. Being an invincible teenager at the time, I wasn't worried. When I arrived downtown, I secured my bike on a shelf that was near the river, so I wouldn't have to ride on the busy streets downtown. The bar was only a 10-minute walk from there anyway, so I walked down the road and got to the street. When I arrived at the bar, my friend Raphael was already there waiting. The night passed quickly, we had fun, but nothing relevant happened, so we can jump forward. Raphael and I went out together, then he called an Uber while I walked back to the river where my bike was. It was 1 in the morning, but the streets were still full of people partying. When I got to the river, it was quite deserted. As I walked along the path, it became very dark. When I got to the river, I noticed that there was a group of guys hanging out about 30 meters from where my bike was. It was too dark to see anything about them, but a random group of guys at 1 a.m. In my city, it's always a little unsettling. I always keep my head down and focus on my business. That works most of the time. I could hear them talking to each other, and then I saw one of them look at me and whisper something to the others. It was creepy, and I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. As I approached my bike, the group was still there, but they hadn't gotten any closer. I tried not to look at them and concentrated on my bike. Once I got to it, I heard one of the boys yell, "It's him!" Another voice shouted, "Grab it!" I managed with a lock. I could barely control my fingers. When I looked back, I could see that they were approaching me. I managed to unlock my bike and get on just as one of the guys started running in my direction. I pedaled as fast as I could and was able to get away from them a bit. It was clear that they couldn't follow me, so I thought that would be the end. After a few more seconds, I looked back and saw that they had stopped chasing me. They were standing on the trail. I was a little relieved, but I kept pedaling. Then I heard a shot from behind. It was a high-pitched sound that echoed off the riverbank. I didn't dare to look back at that moment. I just pedaled as hard as I could. Eventually, I got home and called the police. Apparently, the shot had already been reported. I don't know why they came after me. Looking back, I think they probably thought I was someone else. Maybe it was a gang thing and they thought it was some kind of rival. Like I said, crime is serious in my city, but you're generally fine if you mind your own business. Unfortunately, they never found the shooter. Random shots are alarmingly common in my area, so this case was probably lost among them. Story 5. This happened in the early 90s. My boyfriend and I attended a concert where a famous rock band was performing in a small venue. It was at a recreation center and the band attracted many motorcyclists to the show. It wasn't our kind of music, we liked rock from the 80s and 90s, but we went with my boyfriend's older cousin, whom we were visiting. The whole crowd was much older than us. Almost everyone was at the front of the stage, including my boyfriend's cousins. We were sitting in the back at a small table, and there were some other people at their own tables, too. At one point, my boyfriend went to the bathroom. Just after he left, a motorcyclist approached me. He didn't say anything. He just picked me up, put me on his shoulder, and started hanging out with me. I was in total shock. He was a big, tall guy, 6 feet tall, and I'm a small woman of 6 feet and 50 pounds. He lifted me up as if I were a rag doll. I started kicking and screaming for him to let me go, as well as shouting my boyfriend's name. I beat his chest with my fists. People around me just watched. The music was so loud that I don't think anyone heard me, but they certainly saw me. I don't look anything like a female biker, so anyone would have known we weren't together. Plus, he was much, much older than me. Carried me for what seemed like an eternity, though it was probably only a minute. He was heading towards the door and the doorman wasn't there, but he'd been there all night before. I was so scared that I started screaming for help. When we were about to get to the door, the recreation center was in a huge park. It was late and dark. The front door was already open and he took me straight outside. I kept screaming at the top of my lungs for help, and that's when a group of boys who were outside smoking rescued me. They took me down and knocked him to the ground. They called the police and arrested him. I shudder to think about what would have happened to me if those guys weren't outside that door to help me. Sadly, my story doesn't get any more interesting than that. The police took the motorcyclist away, and I was left trembling and grateful to be safe. My friends came back from the concert and were stunned to hear what had happened to me. After that, we went home, but the incident left a mark on me. It made me realize how vulnerable we can be in situations like this, even in places that seem safe. I thank those guys who saved me and will make sure to be more alert in the future. I will never be able to listen to that band's music in the same way after this experience.